Martin Luther King Jr. From a depressed child to civil rights activist. Born on January 15, 1929, Martin Luther King Jr. went from an unmotivated child to one of the greatest civil rights activists in America. We hope this video gives you the courage you need to believe in yourself and pursue your biggest dreams. If you're new here, consider subscribing so you won't miss other interesting videos like this. Birth. King was born as Michael King Jr., like his father, Michael King Sr. Some years later, the senior King would rename his son and himself to Martin Luther, and raise King and his siblings in a religious African-American community in Atlanta, Georgia. The era of racial abuse and segregation. When King was 6, he befriended a white boy, but that boy's father and racial segregation in public schools cut things short before their friendship could blossom. In later years, King realized how bad the segregation was after his father stood his ground against a white store clerk who refused to serve them. This and other acts of racial humiliation left a lasting impression on King. Attempted suicide. In 1941, King's maternal grandmother's death from a heart attack overwhelmed King with shock and depression. He attempted suicide from his family home's second-story window, but survived. Finding a purpose. Other than being a brilliant student and public speaker, 15-year-old King coasted through his high school years without purpose or motivation. Even though his father was a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, King found himself a skeptic of religion. He could not comprehend his family and others' emotional displays of worship, nor could he believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Coming to terms. After graduating from Morehouse College with a sociology degree, ironically, King entered the Crozer Theological Seminary for his Bachelor of Divinity degree. There he looked at Christianity in a new light, believing it as a force for social change. He also courted a white woman, but he came to terms that society would never permit their relationship. So with a heavy heart, King broke things off. Later in 1953, he married Coretta Scott and then honored his calling as pastor of Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery Bus Boycott. Upon hearing news of one Rosa Parks' defiance against racial segregation on a Montgomery bus and subsequent arrest, King joined forces with the NAACP Montgomery chapter to lead the Montgomery Bus Boycott in 1955. Though King was arrested and his house bombed, the African-American community took legal action against Montgomery and Alabama and won. Henceforth, the law mandating racial segregation across public transportation was lifted in 1956. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Luther and other African-American civil rights leaders may have achieved victory at a state level, but not on a national scale. So they founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference (SCLC) in 1957, seeking to promote civil rights movements through organized nonviolent protests. King's brief visit to India and learning of Gandhi's activism further assured him of his decision of nonviolence. The Sitin Movement. Throughout North Carolina in 1960, African-American students started a sit-in movement in lunch counter stores across North Carolina. These students received support from King and the SCLC. Out of their partnerships, the students would form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, whose nonviolent protest ended racial segregation at lunch counters later that year. The Albany Movement. In 1961, King and the SCLC assisted in the Albany Movement, a desegregation coalition of the SNCC, NAACP, and several Albany city officials. However, the movement failed to desegregate public spaces in West Georgia, causing a rift between King's SCLC and a radical faction of the SNCC. The Birmingham Movement. In early 1963, Birmingham, King and the SCLC mobilized a protest of men and women and even children, but the police dispersed their peaceful walk with dogs and high-pressure water hoses. Though the confrontational movement succeeded in desegregating Birmingham, The media and other shocked critics criticized King for putting children in harm's way. Letter from Birmingham Jail. In light of the Birmingham Movement and future marches, King replied in a letter, answering those criticisms about the reluctance of African American civil rights movements to pursue legal channels. In his letter, King stated how the system of racial segregation clogged those channels. And secondly, in his words, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. The Great March on Washington, D.C. Success from the Birmingham Movement spurred the need to bring the civil and economic rights of African Americans into national focus. On August 28, 1963, King led a mass demonstration of 200,000 to 300,000 people to march on Washington, D.C., the March for Jobs and Freedom. The I Have a Dream speech. During the Washington March, many people of different races gathered around the Lincoln Memorial, where King made a speech about his dream. Amongst the lines of his iconic speech was, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin but by the content of their character." The Civil Rights Act. The Washington March and King's iconic speech eased the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. The act enabled the U.S. government to outlaw any forms of discrimination, desegregation from public facilities, voting registration, and employment opportunities. In recognition of his efforts, King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1964. Bloody Sunday. On Sunday, March 7, 1965, many unarmed African American citizens were marching from Selma to Montgomery to protest voting obstruction when law enforcement officers descended on Edmund Peters Bridge with nightsticks and tear gas. Disturbed from the televised brutality and arrest, King himself led the second march and faced no suppression. The Voting Rights Act. When the Alabama government refused to support or protect the third march, President Lyndon Johnson stepped in their place, sent forth FBI agents and 1,900 members of the Alabama National Guard. King and the marchers safely arrived in Montgomery. Later that year, the U.S. Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Chicago Freedom Movement for Open Housing. As news of King's nonviolent civil rights effort rippled through the South, King and his cohorts decided to head north, or more specifically, the city of Chicago, where they uncovered racial segregation in housing, education, and amongst others. Unlike the South, rioters peppered King's marches with racial slurs, bottles, and stones. This forced the Chicago mayor to pass the Summit Agreement in 1966, fostering the reality of open housing among other positive things to come. The Memphis Sanitation Strike of 1968. To protest the unfair treatment towards the African American sanitary workers of Memphis, King started a massive march downtown, yet it ended after a clash erupted between the Memphis police and a group of teenage vandals. The I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. Although a bomb scare delayed his return flight to Memphis, King arrived in time to deliver his speech. Among the lines of the airy and most self-prophetic speech were, "And I have seen the promised land. I may not go there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." Assassination. On Thursday, April 4, 1968, King was killed by a sniper's bullet while standing on the balcony of Lorraine Motel. Every aspect of King's life was a fight against the opposition to achieve his goals. When you are bent on success, this is the kind of attitude you should develop. Hard work and persistence are the keys to success. Thank you very much for watching our videos. We'd like to give you another interesting video for you to enjoy next. But before then, our team will be very happy if you can like this video and share it with your friends on social media. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss other interesting videos like this. Look at your screen now to see 2 other videos we handpicked for you to enjoy next. We love you.